Thank you for calling. All our representatives are currently busy with other callers. Please stay on the line as your business is important to us.
up until about maybe 3:45. I'm just going to leave it running. Maybe do a little microwave. I'm just going to leave it on this way. Just leave this thing running on the side. And then when I sit, yes, so like 3:45 is really I'll sign off. Get the audio okay on that. So it'll take a second. I just switched over. It'll take it.
Reference the same code, and when
it'll take a second.
Goes to look for different resources and things.
Nah, it'll take a second to switch over.
Relatively be in the same places. But if you write the absolute path, where it's C drive, whatever, if you have maybe a B drive, or you have a D drive, or you have an F drive, it's going to break that. It's not going to be able to find the code that it's looking for.
Can y'all see it?
So
no, it'll be // and then it'll have that folder name in power. And then
Are you seeing me with the desktop and everything?
Exactly. So you'll be doing that again and again, especially with web development, because when you go and you list like other libraries and things that you use like CSS or JavaScript.
Check, test. Check.
Over and over and over again. So it'll be something that you get familiar with. But that's the reason.
Check, test. You can hear me? You can hear me over the speakers? Okay. Turn my mic. Okay. I will try to speak loud. Yeah, the hold music is a little loud, yeah. Okay, are y'all good? When are you ready? Is everybody back? I'll give you a couple more minutes. All right, I'll do it. Bye-bye. Okay, so welcome back from lunch, the afternoon sessions. So hello to, we're simulcasting live to Winston-Salem right now. So I'm Harper Trow, I'm Allie's business partner. I'm gonna try standing up here and kind of hunching over and typing, but I may have to sit down later. So this afternoon we're gonna be covering a little bit about internet architecture, sort of what goes on behind the scenes, sort of when you're going to websites and sort of look behind the scenes at web pages to see what's going on underneath the covers. And we're going to get a little bit more into HTML and CSS at the tail end of this afternoon, and certainly for the next several days. But you'll get a little bit of a preview today as to sort of what goes on behind web pages, just to get a sense of what web pages look like, what the structure of the code looks like, just to give you some familiarity with it. Hello? Okay, are y'all, it's still streaming. Hold on. Try going to events again under live streaming. Sorry about this. You see events under live streaming? We good? We're good? Okay. All right. All right. So, hello, Winston-Salem. My name is Harper Trow. I'm a Down and Allie's business partner. We'll be starting the afternoon class, kicking it off, talking a little bit about internet architecture and sort of how the web works behind the scenes, how DNS resolution works, so translating queries into IP addresses, and kind of what your browser's doing behind the scenes to serve up web pages. So the first thing that we're going to do is take a look at what actually happens when you type google.com into your browser. So everybody's familiar with browsing the web, but not a lot of people know what actually happens behind the scenes when you do that. The very first thing that has to happen, because all of the servers all over the internet work on IP addresses, so everything is assigned an IP address, kind of looks like this. 172.217.5.238. They have those 4 little groupings, and every server that you hit on the internet has that. This is an IP4 internet address, so it kind of has that format. IP6 addresses are much longer. They're much longer, and they're basically self-assigned. So for today, we're going to talk about IP4 addresses and kind of how all this works behind the scenes. So when you type in google.com into your browser, the very first thing it needs to do is figure out how to translate google.com into that IP address, so it knows kind of where to find Google on the internet. So it makes a call over DNS. This stands for domain name system. There are all kinds of ports on your computer that are used to connect to the internet. Different services run on different ports. This DNS happens to run on port 53. So it sends out kind of a query, almost like you querying for Google. It sends out, what is the IP address for google.com? It sends those to your DNS servers, and we'll kind of look at how those are set up in a minute. So it sends that out to a DNS server, the DNS server that you have. The DNS server will respond back, Google is at this address. Okay, and at that point, your browser knows, okay, now I know where to call this, where to find this on the internet. So the second thing it does is it opens up port 80 for HTTP. That's kind of the web protocol, hypertext protocol, or HTTPS, which the S stands for secure. So if you've heard of SSL certificates or TLS, the little lock that appears in the corner of your browser, that means that it's secure. So there's the unsecure port, the secure port, and it'll call out over one of those, and it'll say, get me, and we'll talk about HTTP verbs in a little bit, but get me the root at google.com. So find me the root web content at that location. So then the web server at Google will respond back, okay, here's some HTML, here's some CSS, here's some images, here's some JavaScript, basically everything that needs to go along with that bundle, essentially. And those will get kind of zipped up and sent down efficiently to your browser, and then your browser kind of puts all that stuff back together, all the HTML, the images, the CSS, pushes it all together and renders it as the page that you see. Now, this all happens very, very quickly. If you look at these responses, we'll kind of look at a call and response and see how fast it is in a minute. But this all happens in a blink of an eye. So but every time it's making these two calls. Now, once your browser knows that google.com is at this address, it'll kind of cache that. It'll say, okay, I know for the next hour or so, I'm going to assume that google.com is at this address, and just sort of remember it's there. And so all the subsequent calls you make, it already knows where it is. The way that these DNS servers work, when you call into a DNS server, DNS server is basically just a specialized computer that has a giant database with lists of these things. So google.com is this number, amazon.com is this number, and it just knows basically all the addresses on the internet. Now, any given box doesn't know every address on the internet, but it knows where it can find that. So, like Ali was talking about this morning, kind of the hierarchies of the file structure, there's also a hierarchy of DNS servers. So there's the DNS server that you call into. If it doesn't know the answer, it can kind of call up to the next server, up to the next server. And at the very top of the internet, there are like 13 root servers. So when you talking about like a .com address or a .net address or any of the other subdomain suffixes, those root servers kind of they're kind of the main repository for all of those addresses. And they talk to all the DNS servers at your ISP. So if you use Comcast or Verizon, those DNS servers there will kind of communicate to those larger DNS servers in the cloud and kind of get that. They synchronize that information every once in a while. And you'll see where we talk about TTL, time to live. You can kind of set how long you want those things to be remembered. So you can say an hour or 2 hours, and then when the server gets at it, it won't ask again for an hour or 2 hours or however long the time to live is on that. When you go to register your domain later on this afternoon, you'll specify TTL, how long you want that to live. And where that comes into play is if you're moving servers, if you're switching them from one place to the other, as some of you may have done, whenever you switch a website to a new hosting provider, sometimes it takes like an hour to sort of catch up. Like the internet sort of doesn't know about it for about an hour, and then it kind of switches to the new address. That's where that comes into play. It's not that the server's not there up and running. It's that all the browsers that are asking these DNS servers, where is this? It doesn't really know. And then an hour later, it gets that refresh and says, ah, it's here. It's here now. It knows where to go get it. So let's take a look at a couple of things here. I'm going to pop open some terminals. I'm going to do this on Mac and Windows just so you get kind of a flavor of both. Bump this up in size. And over here on Windows, I'm going to pop open the command window that Ali showed you this morning. And I'm going to do one simple thing. I'm going to type in ping, P-I-N-G. Y'all can follow along with this. Just pop open a command prompt. Type in ping google.com. And you'll see it tries to ping out and requesting timeout. They may be blocking pings here on location, but basically you'll see that when I do ping google.com, it knows right here in brackets what IP address it is. So when I'm typing in ping here, it's doing two things. It's making that DNS call to the DNS server saying, where is Google? And then getting that IP address back, and then it's kind of pinging it like that. And normally, they may be blocking things here on the network, but normally you would see it kind of respond back, with a ping, a message back. And it's usually very, very fast, just, 8 or 9 milliseconds. It looks like they're blocking that here. You can do the same thing. You can do the same thing over here if you're on a Mac. And that's timing out too. Yeah. So I guess they're blocking that here. That's another thing to talk about is firewalls. So a firewall, if evidently they're running a firewall here at VCU where they're protecting against outbound sort of pings or requests coming back. That's something that kind of lives at the edge of your network that can, we talked about ports. DNS works over port 53. HTTP works over port 80. So firewalls are things that, machines that allow only certain traffic to go in and out. So they might be blocking ICMP, which is the ping protocol. But they are letting out port 50 and 443 because we've all been using the web this morning, and that's sort of what your HTTP web traffic is traveling over. So that's a little bit about DNS resolution. Now you can override that using a hosts file. So even though there are these services kind of out in the cloud, these DNS servers that you can hit, you can say you want to be able to talk to different machines on a local network, or you have something that doesn't have a registered domain name yet. It just lives on a server somewhere. It's got an IP address, but it doesn't have a DNS record yet. You haven't registered that domain. You can kind of trick your local operating system into thinking that this name matches this IP address. This is really useful for testing things. And it basically is think of it as an override for DNS. So it's a way of, on your local machine, saying, yeah, I want this name to be associated with this IP address. So the way to get to that on a Mac or Linux is you go into Etsy and cat. This is a command that just says show me what's in this file. So we're going to do cat hosts. On Windows, you go into your C drive. This is under Windows, System 32, and you can see the whole path up here. So Windows System 32. They like to hide this in Windows, way down deep. So it's on C, Windows System 32, drivers, and then Etsy. You'll notice that the Etsy, etc. is still kind of matches what's in Linux. At the very root of it, this driver technology, this host file is very, very old. In fact, this is how the internet started out. If you can believe it, the first couple of years of the internet, probably the first 4 or 5 years of the internet, everything there was no DNS system, and the way that people knew where machines were on the internet was they passed host files around, right? So you had colleges FTPing, sending each other these host files. and that would say where all the other machines on the internet was. So this was kind of the very first DNS system were these host files here. So I'm going to open this up in Notepad++, and you'll see here that the first couple entries here and on the Mac are localhost. This is a special entry, 127.0.0.1. It's called the loopback address, and this is really important. This will come into play in web development, because when you're developing a web app locally, you're going to open a browser and you're not going to go out to the internet. You're going to come back to your same machine, right? And your machine is going to be running code that you're looking at on your browser. So you're almost always going to hit localhost, and it usually runs on a certain port. Different application environments have, you do localhost 3000 or localhost 4000, something like that, depending on what you're running. And when you open a browser, you'll actually see stuff on your own machine. So basically, 127.0.0.1 or localhost, if it's mapped in a host file like this, will basically tell your browser to look, to kind of go out instead of going on the internet to come to your machine. So that's what that is. Usually you'll see that see over here on the map, on the Mac, the same thing. It's usually the first two entries, localhost or broadcast host. Broadcast host just tells it where to broadcast messages on a local network. That's kind of another special one. So you'll see, and this is localhost. See this address right here. This is what IP version 6 looks like versus IPv4. So IPv4 are always these 4-section numbers. Whenever you see those something dot something dot something dot something, you'll know that that's a version 4 IP address. The world is running out of those. There's only a finite number of IP4 addresses, right, in the whole world, and with the explosion of Internet of Things devices and all these other sensors and network connected devices, it's very, very quickly running out of those. So we're switching over time to IPv6, which is a giant number. This one's a special one, so it's kind of short, but usually they're huge, huge numbers, and they're kind of self-assigned. And the number space is so big that you can just say, hey, I'm this address, and the likelihood that you're going to collide with any other address on the planet is very low. So it's a different kind of numbering system. But you can see down here there are a couple of entries where I've said, hey, I want this. This is a local machine on my home network. When I type that into a browser, I want it to go to this IP address, right? It's just a shortcut to not have to put that number in every time. And this, like I said, this is useful for testing if you want to test out a domain name that's not live yet. Something where you want to test the domain name and some of your code is sort of looking at that and parsing that. You can point that to localhost, and say, hey, www.google.com is here, right on my laptop. I don't recommend doing that, but so a lot of times, if you have problems with DNS, if you're on somebody else's machine, you can kind of come here and look and see if somebody's done that override. So that is localhost, how that works. So a little bit about web servers. We're going to be looking at lots of different types of web servers during the course of this class. The primary one that we're going to be working with .NET is called IIS, Internet Information Server. It's something that lives on that you install on Windows, on a Windows server. And like Ali was showing before, it lives as kind of a service. So it's one of those things that's running no matter what. Like when you turn your machine on, it's already there. It's not like an application that you have to go and sort of open up. So once you install that, it'll run on port 80, or if you have an SSL certificate and want to secure and have a little lock and lock things down, it'll run on port 443, and that'll run on localhost. So you'll be going to localhost, port 80 if you went to your local IS server. There are other web servers that are pretty popular on Linux. Apache and Nginx are very popular web servers, very fast. So we'll be taking a look at that a little bit later in class. But for now, I wanted to dig into some things actually in the browser. So this will be something that you can follow along with if you want to pop open Chrome and sort of follow along with that. what we're going to be doing is looking at the developer tools and kind of viewing source. This is where we're going to get at kind of the behind the scenes view of what's going on the web. So the very first thing you want to do, I'm just going to start off on the course content today. If you find a place that's not a click region, so somewhere else down here where you have a pointer, you can right click and do view page source. And what we're looking at right now is basically the source code, the HTML and CSS and JavaScript. This page is mainly HTML of this page. So essentially, this is the if you kind of opened up a web page and looked at what was running inside, this is what's running inside. And so you'll notice a couple things. There's an HTML tag at the top. There's a header section. This is where you're going to have kind of things like titles and then references to your HTML or your JavaScript and CSS files. And then you start having the all the different tables and divs and everything that kind of makes up your web page. A better way to kind of play with this is nice, but you're only seeing kind of an HTML view. This is sort of just one file that gets sent down to your browser. So it's kind of not the whole picture. It's an interesting way to look at things, but it's really not the whole picture. And we can take a look at something just for comparison. If you pull up something like Amazon.com and go here and right click on this, kind of hard to find a non-clickable area. View page source on this. You can see how long it takes to kind of load, and you can see how big this is. When you look at my cursor on the side, it's like you can see how big these web pages are and how much JavaScript there is. Amazon especially is a huge site. Usually that's why on a slow computer it kind of takes a while to load. It's sending a massive amount of information and pictures and everything down. So you can see the difference between this for kind of a big site like that, and then something simple like this for for instance the agenda site. There's just a lot less information there. Where it gets really interesting though is digging into the developer tools. So that viewing source on something, it's a good way to get a sense of the HTML structure if you're ever curious about like how web pages are laid out. Sort of what they're doing behind the scenes to kind of get things to put in certain areas. It's kind of a good quick look. A much better way of doing it though, and it gives you kind of a deeper look into all the elements of the thing, is looking at the developer tools. So you may not be able to see this in Winston-Salem, but in the upper right hand corner they're like a little ellipsis, and if you click on that and do more tools, and then choose developer tools. There's also a shortcut, and I'll do this on Windows as well, just so you can see. Same thing on a Mac or Windows. Just open up Chrome. Okay, and then if you come up here to the corner, click on that little ellipsis, choose more tools, and then developer tools. It's also Control-Shift-I. That's the shortcut. So we've kind of been learning shortcuts this morning. Control-Shift-I will get you there. And you'll see it pops up this little area below Chrome. These are the developer tools. You're going to be using them all the time. So get used to these. You're going to be spending like half your time in here kind of trying to figure out what's going on and debugging things. This is a really important area. So we're going to kind of go through it tab by tab and take kind of a deep look at this. So starting over here, over on the left-hand side, it'll say select an element. You want to click this and make it blue so it kind of highlights a little bit. And then you'll see as I start moving around the page, it's highlighting certain areas. Now if I click on one, you'll notice down here in the bottom, it kind of loaded sort of where I am on the page. So it's a really cool way of, if you say, hey, how is this button wired up, or where, is this picture like in a div, or is it in a table, or what does the HTML look like right here in this certain area? you can just come over here, grab that, and say, I want to click on this. Let me figure out this, this link right here, and it'll take you directly to it down here in the source code in the HTML. This is essentially the same view down here of what we were looking at before, kind of in that full page view source, but this is interactive and it works both ways. So you can either click something up here and it'll show you and kind of sync it up down here, or as you're digging through the source code down here, the HTML, you could say, let me find this last row down here and click it. Or you can say, let me find something up at the top here. Yeah. So I want to click on this logo, and then you'll see that it highlights it at the top. So whether you're on the page and you want to see what the source is, or whether you're on the source and kind of click it, it'll kind of highlight in the browser view sort of what you're looking at. This is super useful. This area, and you can use it to do some pretty interesting things. It's really great for layout, for kind of playing around with how the page is laid out. As we start learning about CSS, you'll realize that's kind of the programmatic way of saying, this is how I want things formatted, this is the area I want them to be this background color, I want the text to be this color. But sometimes it's kind of hard to program that CSS, and then you kind of have to refresh the browser to see it. This is a way that you can kind of play with it interactively. So if you come over here, you look at this this computed area. So I'm gonna play with this logo here at the top, and I'm gonna click on this computed tab right here. This is basically showing you the box model of HTML. HTML, the way that HTML works, it starts in the upper left-hand corner, and everything kind of renders as, you can think of it as like Legos, kind of stacked boxes. Every element in HTML has got a box around it. And we'll go into detail about how the box model works later, but just suffice to say, everything's got a margin and padding around it. And so you see this right here. This is the logo. It's got a margin above it. It's got a border. It's got padding. So if I wanted to kind of bump this over a little bit, or bump it down, I might say, hey, let's put a 50 pixel margin at the top of that. And you see when I hit return, boom, it bumps it right down, right? And so it's kind of cool. You can come in here and say, as you're doing HTML and CSS sort of layout, you can come in here and move things around. You can put a border around it, and add some. I want a bigger margin. I want to bump it way down, and it'll kind of show you, look, here's, like if I hover over the margin, there's the margin that's over top of it. This is really helpful in debugging when you're doing CSS, like why are things laid out the way they are? Because a lot of times that the way that CSS works is because it's layering things. There are lots of, we'll get into it with CSS, but things apply to lots of different elements, and you're never sure sort of where it's coming from, why something looks the way it does. So this will show you here. The styles tab is also really helpful. This actually does show you where the HTML that's being applied, or the CSS that's being, the styles that are being applied to this element, where they're coming from. So are they an inline style? Are they coming from a style sheet? You can see right here, this is coming from a style sheet. This is being applied from a style sheet. And a lot of times in complex apps, you'll have multiple style sheets. So you may have one thing for layout, another thing for another style sheet for fonts and that kind of thing. So this kind of shows you where it's coming from. Kind of helps you debug back to the source of where this particular style is coming from. And this is nice. It gives you all the information about the sizes, what fonts are used, how tall the element is. And you can change things just like the box model. You can change things in line. So I want to make this change the height to 50, right? And the logo gets smaller. This is great for like resizing images. Figuring out how everything's going to lay out on your page. You kind of go in and just play with it. It's like a playground. So that is the elements thing. Are there any questions? Anybody who has any questions, put them in. I'm watching the Slack channel, so anybody who wants to Salem has any questions, let me know. Oh, go ahead. Yes. Yes. So HTML, in an ideal world, HTML is just going to be elements to kind of hold your content, and then those elements will have styles. They'll have classes, and we'll get into this in detail in the next couple of days. They'll have like a class that's applied to it, and that class will be in your it's like a definition in your CSS file, and it'll say, you know, I want the text to be this big, I want it to be this font size, you know, that kind of thing. And by that element having that class applied to it, so I'll show you an example in here. See right here, see this div? Let me zoom in on this a little bit. So this div has a class of call XS12 and then text center, right? So just by having that text center in there puts this logo right in the middle of it, right? So it's like you can apply a class to something, and all of a sudden it takes on sort of a new property, essentially. So yeah, in an ideal world, and I chuckle at that because there's all kinds of inline styles and things you're not really supposed to do, probably in this site. But you would normally have kind of a div-based layout, all these elements, paragraphs and divs that kind of hold your HTML, your content. And that content can be static like it is here, or it can be dynamic, meaning that it's generated by the code you're writing. Like you can generate it in real time. This is a static site. This is just something that we kind of publish out there. It's mainly a static HTML, something you could write up in a Notepad or whatever and publish out there. We'll be getting into dynamic content a little bit later in the course, but you'll see that yeah, it's picking up these couple of classes here. Call XS12 is just that's a Bootstrap class. We'll be getting into Bootstrap in a couple of days. That's just a way of laying out HTML on the grid. It's really easy to use. So you can say, you know, I want things in the center here. I want this to be, you know, this content to be 2 columns wide, and you know, it kind of helps you lay things out on a page real easily. All right, so that is the Elements tab. You'll use that a ton for HTML and CSS. Remember, you can use these tabs over here to change things, to kind of play around with things, you know, and do layout. It's really nice. You can actually change things in here as well. So you can see, you know, when I put that style over here, it changed it. I can change it back right in line, right there as well. So there's all kinds of, you know, entry points into making changes there. It's just whichever way you prefer, whichever way is easiest to you. So moving on to the Sources tab. Sources is going to be really, really important when we start getting into JavaScript and start getting into coding. This is going to be where JavaScript is, you know, the web language that essentially runs inside your browser. So it's code running inside of kind of a sandbox inside of Chrome. And this is where you'll be able to get in there and actually like set breakpoints and kind of debug through it, and kind of see what's going on with the code behind the scenes. So this is a really important place. So in here, there's not an enormous amount of JavaScript in this site, which is kind of a good example. But if we open up the JS file in here. Actually, let me go to. I'm going to go to a different site here because I know. Let's go to the agenda site. Okay. One. Okay. Okay, so if we go into sources here, remember we talked about relative paths earlier, right? Relative paths in the context of a file system, and I mentioned that it's important because the web kind of works the same way. So you'll notice in here, if I drill into my HTML file, so this is day one, kind of what we're looking at here. You'll notice in the header up here at the top, we've got a style sheet reference and we've got a JavaScript reference. So this page is basically saying, hey, I want to use these styles. It's pointing to a file, and I want to use this JavaScript file. It's pointing to that file. Now you'll notice, remember when Ali was kind of showing the, you know, // like go up a level. So you can see right here, this is kind of a virtualized folder structure. You can see that day one HTML is in like a day one folder. So you can imagine day two, day three, having a bunch of folders there. All right, so in order to get to, it's referencing this CSS file right here, and it's referencing this JavaScript file right here. So you'll notice that the source reference right here says ... so up a level, and then assets, and then JS, and then agenda.js. And so that's saying in relative to this file, go up a level, right, to the course content kind of root folder, down into the assets folder. So it goes here, and then it drills into JS, opens that folder, and then it wants agenda.js, which is this file right here. Super, super simple JavaScript file. Like, there's nothing scary about that. Very, very small, and I'll kind of show you what it does here. So this is an example of like setting a breakpoint. You'll do this all the time when you're looking at JavaScript stuff. So when I clicked right here on the side, this is sort of your source file. This is a JavaScript file, so it kind of has your line numbers and everything. I'm going to put a breakpoint right here and right here. And what that does is it basically says when you get to this point in the code, when the browser's running through this code, when you get here, stop. Like stop and hang out so I can kind of look at what's going on. So y'all have noticed that on the days, the introductions, you kind of click them and they expand a little bit. It's JavaScript that's doing that. It's JavaScript that's showing and hiding those sections. So when you click it, it opens up, and when you click it again, it kind of collapses back. So I'll do that. You'll notice when I click it, it'll say pause in debugger, and it actually hit this breakpoint right here, right? And the cool thing is I can go in and sort of look at all of these things that are going on. So basically it says element ID. We'll get into variables and everything in a bit, but this is sort of what's being passed into it. 0800 or 830, which is this 830 time frame. That's the element that's being passed into it. It's sort of getting a reference to that, and you can see how much information is set up is part of that element. And then it'll say I want to set the style of that to display block, right? So when I unpause that, it's basically taking this little element right here that was sort of hiding behind the scenes, and it's saying, hey, I want you to display block. All right? Now when I click it again, all right, this time you'll notice, okay, this is saying if it's already block, right? We're getting into a little coding here. hopefully Ali isn't shaking his head, but we're getting into a little bit of coding here, but that's all right. If target div style display is block, and I'm hovering over it here so you see it is block. So basically it's saying if this is not block, do this. Else do this. So it's just a split. It's saying if you already have this set, go down this path of the code. If you don't, go down this path of the code. So right here it's setting, you'll notice that the first time it went up here, set to block. The second time it's saying set your display to none. So if we run that, it goes away. You'll be doing a lot of this in Bootstrap, kind of once we get Bootstrap set up and get into JavaScript, where you've all been to websites where you kind of you hover over things and they pop up and all kinds of interactive things happen. This is just a small example of that, how it runs. But the point being that in this source tab, this is where you're going to be able to go in and really look at look at the code that's kind of running in your browser and what's going on. So another thing that you can do, another reason why you might set a breakpoint is you're running this, it hits a breakpoint. You can go over here to the console window. Console window is kind of the sister window of sources. This allows you to, if you're paused in a debugger, to kind of to run code, to put in sort of like live code as you're doing it. So I can put in this element ID here, and it'll tell me. I can ask it questions. What's in element ID right now? 0300. And that's nice because when you pause something, you might kind of want to look at the state of what your web page is right now. Whether it's pulling data or displaying things, something isn't going quite right. You can pause it in the debugger, see what's going on there, and then kind of ask it questions. you know, asking what's in this variable, like what's the contents of these things right now. The other really cool tab here that you'll use all the time is the network tab. So the network tab essentially, you know, we talked about DNS before, and then we talked about kind of after that DNS question, then there's the pinging the web server and saying, hey, get me stuff at the root or whatever URL you are, get me all your content there. The network tab is basically where you can see the browser talking to the web server in real time. You'll see the request going out, and you'll see the response coming back. So we'll take a look at what that means. So I'm going to hit refresh here, and you'll see that a couple things loaded in here. So the first thing, actually, there we go. So the first thing is this D1 HTML. Okay, that's the HTML file. That's sort of like the raw structure of the content, everything. So you click on that. When you click on it, if it's HTML or an image or JavaScript, it'll actually give you sort of a preview of it, which is nice. So you can sort of look at what was sent, a preview, and then the response. So you'll notice right here. See, here's the IP address in this remote address. So this is where this website lives. So it made a DNS request, callback, you know, then it said, hey, I'm at this IP address. You'll notice this :443 on the end. That's HTTPS, right? So you see up here in your browser, see this little lock, and it says secure. Whenever you're going to an HTTPS site, that means that you have an encrypted channel between your browser and the web server, that if somebody was looking at the traffic in between, they can't see it. It's all encrypted. It's just like garbage. Only your browser and the web server can communicate securely. Only they can kind of break that code. There is a tiny bit of overhead with it as you make your first call to kind of a secure web server where it does a key exchange. It sort of exchanges sort of the way that each side is going to decode those secrets, kind of the keys to it. And then once that happens, the rest of it that's running inside that encrypted channel is basically like the same as port 80 regular HTTP, just talking back and forth. So you can see here, it's doing a get. You know, a get. HTTP uses different verbs. So there's get, post, put, delete, and we'll get to those once we get into a little bit more into web programming. But just know that get is when you're requesting things, and post and put are kind of when you're updating things or sending information back. So it's saying get the root here, and down here you would sometimes have different parameters. If you filled out a form, like you were logging in, hit send, you might see like a username and password in here, kind of the different parameters that were sent. Here we have our JavaScript file. So this is you just saw this code running in the other console window. This was sent down to the browser too. JavaScript's unique in that basically the server is kind of sending code down to run inside the browser. So usually code kind of runs on a server. In this case, it's sort of sending code down that can run inside kind of a secure sandbox in your browser. And the reason why it's in a sandbox meaning that the JavaScript code that runs inside your browser can't like access your file system. It can't like send email from your computer. It can't do certain things, because if it could, any site that you went to that didn't have the best intentions could essentially run code on your machine. You don't really want that to happen. So all browsers have kind of a secure sandbox. It's sort of a play area where it restricts the code as to what it can do. So it can do things like make things move around inside your browser. It can do certain effects and that kind of thing, but it can't access your local file system, that kind of thing. When we talk about Node.js and server-side JavaScript a little bit later in the course, those technologies do have that capability. So there is JavaScript that can run on your machine, just not the kind that runs inside a browser. So inside of Chrome, it's all kind of locked down and secured. And you'll see the last thing here was the logo. Just send it down. So the nice thing about this too is you can get a sense if you look over here on the right hand side. It kind of shows you the load times for everything. Web browsers can only request they can request a bunch of things, but they can only download a certain number of things at a time, and it's different for different browsers as to how many files they can download simultaneously. So you'll notice on something like Amazon, the reason why the pages take a while to load sometimes is it'll have maybe 100 or 200 files. It maybe only can download 10 at a time, so it has to download those 10 and then wait and then download the next 10 to download the next 10. And they're zipped up and compressed and really small, but it's still as you're developing sites and you start seeing performance problems, start looking at how many files you have, how many assets you're actually sending down to the browser. And we'll look at some tips and tricks later on in the course as to how to kind of compress those together. So take lots and lots of CSS files and make them into one, lots and lots of JavaScript files and make them into one, and even how to take images and sort of squish them into a single thing where it's got lots of images inside of it. So there's lots of different techniques you can use to, there's compression you can use that basically kind of zips things down and sends them across the wire in a smaller format. All kinds of tricks you can do to make things run a little faster. So the last thing that we're going to look at in here is the application tab. So I'm assuming everybody's heard of cookies. You've probably heard maybe a little bit about the GDPR thing rolling out in Europe, where they're really conscious about privacy and having cookies on your browser. A lot of times, if you ever go to a European website, it'll have this thing. It's like, hey, are you sure? Is it cool if we put cookies on your browser? Cookies are something that are used for a lot of different things. They're used to keep track of things in your session. So you may realize that when you log back in, some of your settings will be the same way as they were before. Sometimes websites use cookies to kind of remember that, preferences, that kind of thing. And then on sites like Amazon or Google or whatever, there are things called tracking cookies, right? Which can kind of track you from site to site. The way to see those is if you open up Application, come down here to Cookies, and you'll see that for the Empower course, we're actually not using any. But come here to Amazon, people are usually horrified at how many cookies Amazon puts in here. All kinds of tracking cookies. So open up Amazon and you can see how many cookies are in here, right? Tracking all kinds of information about you. Each one of these is tracking a different aspect of, your visitor ID, your static ID, targets, different tokens and timing things. But basically, some of these are used for, like I said, just user preferences, things that are beneficial. Some of these things are used for for tracking you. If you're concerned about cookies and privacy and tracking, I'll come back over here to my Mac. I've got a little thing just to show you. Go to Amazon.com, and you'll see up in this, I've got a little plugin called Privacy Badger. And this kind of shows all of the tracking cookies that Amazon is using. So there's a company you may have heard of called DoubleClick. Google bought them a while back, and they got in trouble for a while for doing too much tracking of people across different websites. Like it was like too creepy and too intense. So you can install things like this if you don't want if you want to protect your privacy a little bit more. You do have to be careful because sometimes it does adversely affect different functionality. So you can kind of disable it or turn it on or off for different sites. But that is an option if you're worried about cookies and people tracking. So back here to the cookies. This is how you kind of look at cookies, and you can also clear them out. You can hit clear and clear individual cookies out, or you can go to your browser settings and clear all of your, all your browser history and all of your cookies out at once. That's going to like log you out of everything. You have to log back into all your sites, everything that it remembers about you, it'll forget. But from a programmatic standpoint, cookies are useful for storing information about users that are stored in their browser, so that you can kind of recognize them next time. Like even if they sign in, you may want to remember some preferences about them, some like nice things, have like some default searches already set for them, that kind of thing. So they're a nice way to do some web functionality. Yep.
So, what if, since you're on Amazon, that big picture that they have right here?
Yeah.
But you don't want to have to load that picture every time that you hit that website.
What if I don't want to load? So the question is, what if I don't want to load this giant picture every time I load that website? Yeah, there are things, there are other plugins that you can use that kind of shows like a news reader view of a website. It kind of takes down blocks ads, blocks different pictures, that kind of thing. There are ad blockers. They work in almost exactly the same way. They basically, instead of blocking cookies that are notorious for sort of tracking things, sites can also track you through images. So if they display an image to you, they know you're there. And you can there are plugins where you can block images as well, like tracking images or ads. So if you go to like a news site, instead of seeing a million ads, you just see just the article or the content. Yeah, they work roughly the same way.
I'm guessing kind of like how you were talking about the CSS styles, you just have you pack them all in one file.
Yeah.
So anyway, you know, stick that image on your computer so you don't have to load it the next time.
Yeah, well, all these are cached. All these are cached. That's a great question. So just like we didn't really touch on caching. So in here, in the network tab, okay. So you can see there's a million different things I downloaded here from Amazon. If I come up here and reload this, since I've already loaded this this screen, you'll see everything kind of flies back in here. Everything filters back in. And you'll notice these status codes here. These are important, and we'll get into them a little bit later in the course. But status code of 200 basically means okay. It means like you asked a get for this particular asset, and the server said okay. 200 is like, yep, here it is. You'll notice that hopefully. All right, so 304. 304 means. So here's a JPEG image, right? And I've already downloaded it. Here's another 304 up here for a document. 304 means, I said, hey, I want to get this image, and the server said 304. You've already got it, right? I know that you've already asked for that, or the browser says, hey, I've got a cached copy, a local cached copy of this image, and I don't need to go get it again. So that's something when you're hitting a site over and over again. There are little tags on these assets called e-tags, and some of them have expirations. So kind of like the DNS TTL, the time to live things, assets can have kind of an expiration on them, for lack of a better word, where they basically say this, keep this image for 4 hours. So if they want to switch it out, you can always refresh it and clear it out and kind of get a new copy. But by default, so that your browser's faster, it'll basically say anything that I've got that hasn't expired yet, that's static, that isn't like dynamic content, it'll say 304. It'll say, hey, I've already got this in my local, it stores it on your hard drive in your computer. I've already got this image. I'm just going to pull it right back up. I'm not going to go ask Amazon for it again. So yeah, great question. We are getting close to 2. Does anybody have any other questions before we go on? I think we'll take maybe a tiny little micro break before the source control thing, maybe just a 5-minute break. If anybody in Winston-Salem has any questions, just post them into the questions section in Slack and take a look. Anyone? Good. All right, we will take a 5-minute break and come back with source control. Allie, I'm just going to leave this. Running and put it back on the whole screen, and we'll just resume in like 5 minutes. That's cool. That makes sense to everybody? Those developer tools we use all the time. I mean, I'm in those at least an hour ago. This is a great place to tell there's like the status codes. Like 200, it's okay. With the web server status code coming back. This is a way to kind of look at 100, continue, 200, okay. 404 is a common one. 404 is like not found.
Thank you for calling. All our representatives are currently busy with other callers. Please stay on the line as your business is important to us. Thank you for calling. All our representatives are currently busy with other callers. Please stay on the line as your business is important to us.
All right, for this one, I'm gonna sit down because they said the mic's probably gonna work a little bit better that way. This one will be something where you follow along a little bit. We're gonna get installed and make sure it's kind of configured the right way. If y'all have already installed it, just make sure as we go through the install steps that you set it up the same way. And if not, or you have any issues, we're going to do an exercise right after this. And so we'll just raise your hand if something's not working quite right, and we'll make sure it's all good on when we're working on the exercise. So, without further ado, all right. Can somebody on the Winston-Salem side ping in questions? See if we're good here. All right, so we're good. Okay, so this afternoon we're going to be talking about source control with Git. This is definitely going to be one of the main things that you work with all day, every day. It's going to be how you work with your code and kind of share it and version it and do everything. So this is really important. We're going to have an exercise right after this segment, so everybody can kind of get some hands-on practice with Git. I'm going to be kind of running through the example of the exercise that we're doing and kind of doing it myself, so you can kind of see it before you have to do it. And then for the Winston-Salem folks, when I'm done with that, I'll kind of put this in hold again, and we kind of get the exercise started there. Al, if you can kind of walk around and run that, and I'll explain how it all works. But all right, so getting started, source control with Git. So what is source control? Source control is a way to keep track of changes to source code. So then what is source code? Source code is all of your text, everything that you're typing in as a developer in whichever language you're typing into your editor. It's all of the code that essentially gets compiled down into instructions that the machine can run. So, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, C#, all these languages, all the text that you're typing in, that's all your source code. It's very, very important that you keep it safe and backed up in multiple places, so you never want to lose your source code. It's the foundation of the applications you're going to be building. So source control provides a way to keep multiple versions or feature sets of your application, so you can have a lot of apps you come out with, are version 1, version 2. Even once you've pushed out version 2, you may have to go back and make changes to version 1. So it's a way to version your code, keep track of things, do hot fixes to it, and work on feature sets kind of in isolation. And we'll learn how to do that with branching later on. It's also a way for automation to occur on your source code. So, these days you want to automate sort of your builds, your compiles, your deployments out to servers. You want all of that to be automatic, run tests for you automatically, do checks for you, and push it out to your servers. And in order for automation to happen, the servers have to know how to get your source code, how to get the latest version, how to compile that, and how to push it out. So that's another reason why it's important. And the most important reason is it's a way to collaborate and share with other developers. There's a reason why GitHub is called GitHub. It's a collaborative place where people can make changes to code, and then other developers can pull their changes, kind of add to it, and sort of build things together. So no developer is an island. You're normally going to be on a team with other developers, and source control is kind of a way for everybody to share code in an organized and consistent manner. So why Git? Why Git versus there are other source control platforms. There's Microsoft's Team Foundation server. There's Subversion. There are all kinds of different options out there. Why is Git important? Why do we use it? Why is more and more of the world using it? One of the main important things is it's distributed. So what that means is every developer has not only the entire version of that particular app, but it's got all the other versions and all the other history. So think of it in terms of a giant lockbox. Every change you make, it's got the current version before that, and the one before that, and the one before that. And at any given time, you can roll it back or move it forward, and it's kind of got your entire history of your application inside this little database. It's very, very fast and efficient in the way it stores things. It only stores differences. So when you write a file and then say you add 3 lines to it, it's only going to store that that change, that one little change to it. So it kind of, the way that it stores things is it's kind of additive. So you can think about if you wrote a book, right? You wrote a chapter each day. Each of those things would be a kind of a commit. It's like a where you kind of save it. And in a lot of Microsoft Word or something, you can kind of move back to a different version, move back to a previous version. This works in the same way, where you can kind of get back to any point in time. And it's actually cryptographically verifiable that it was that way at that point in time. So it's very nice to be able to track a verifiable history. It's also cross-platform. It runs on Windows, Linux, Mac, basically every platform out there. It's very, very easy to branch and merge. We'll talk about branching and merging in a little bit, but essentially it's a way of kind of forking off. When you're talking about versions, say you're working on version 1 and you want to kind of branch off and work on an upcoming version without upsetting the code that's sort of already in progress. So you would create a version 2 branch and start working on kind of future features that users don't have yet. Well, at a certain point, those features are done, right? And so you've kind of, you think about it as a lineage. You kind of branch off on that, and you want to merge version 2 back into version 1 so that you can, merge those together and have your entire feature set before you release it. So we'll get more in detail on branching and merging, but suffice to say that Git does it very easily. It's got a very intelligent way of doing merges, which in the past, you're kind of lucky that that you're learning source control at this point in time, because source control has been historically kind of a pain, and merging code from different users has been a real difficult thing to do. Git makes it very easy. The other nice thing about Git is it's got really great tooling. So whether you're using the command line tools or kind of the GUI desktop tools from GitHub, or a lot of text editors or IDEs have it just built in to their systems, where you can do source control right there inside the tool. It's got really nice tooling built up around it. And then GitHub. GitHub is an awesome online platform. To share code. It's a great way to collaborate, and it's awesome. Once you learn it, once you learn how fast the command line commands can be, you'll see why everybody uses it. It's very fast and easy to use. And honestly, it's kind of become the standard. I mean, 5 years ago or so, that wasn't necessarily the case. Maybe 10 years ago, it certainly wasn't the case. But it's pretty much standard. Everybody uses it now. So let's get it installed. If you have the Git executable installed, or downloaded rather, if you have the 32-bit version or the 64-bit version on your desktop, if you have an Empower laptop, you're done. It's already installed. If you've already installed Git, kind of follow through with this anyway. Kind of look through and make sure that you install it the same way. But if you haven't installed yet, then that's what we're going to step through. So if you're on Windows, we're gonna go through the Windows installation real quick and make sure everybody's got that set up. And then for the Mac users that want to install it on the Mac side, kind of hang on at the end. We'll do and install that. It's a lot easier on a Mac. It's only a couple steps. If you're running a Mac with a virtual machine, you want to install it kind of in both places. Go through on the Windows side and your virtual machine, and then for the Mac installation, we'll pop out to a terminal window, and I'll show you how to install it there as well. Okay, so if you right-click on the Git executable, the installer, like I said, it'll be Git 64-bit exe or 32-bit, depending on which operating system you're on. You'll see something like this. You want to right-click it and install as administrator. If you don't see that option, you can just double-click it, and you should see something like this. Just hit run. You'll see the license come up. This is the GNU General Public License. Just an aside about open source software here. When you see a license like this, the GNU Public License means that it's open source. It means that Git itself is a collaborative project. It's sort of like a free project that everybody contributes to. You can use the software freely. The GNU public license means that if you make changes to it and then you recontribute it back, that your changes have to go with it. Like, you can't keep a private copy of Git and sort of make it into a saleable product. There are other open source licenses that are a little bit more lenient. One of the main ones is MIT. So when we get into Ruby later on, we'll talk about like the MIT license and how some of the open source licenses are different. But basically, open source software has kind of taken over the world. If you haven't heard of it, a lot of the products that we're going to be using during this class are open source. Basically means that they're free and open products. It means that the source code of the application itself is published, so you can make changes to it and modify it to your liking, and then contribute to it. That's another thing that GitHub is great at, is if you want to go contribute to an open source, project, once you've kind of gained these coding skills, you can go out and add a feature to Git, or add a feature to something else, and kind of contribute in that way. So anyway, just take the default here, hit next. Where should this be installed? You're going to see something like this. You may see a variation where it's C program files, x86 if you're on a 32-bit machine, Git, but something like that. Just take the defaults here is fine. Hit next. This one's kind of important. You want to make sure that that Git bash here is checked underneath that, because we're going to be using that in a little bit. You also want to make sure Git LFS, large file support, is checked, and then the two underneath that where you're associating the different file types. So make sure this screen kind of looks like that. What's that? So the question was, can we check the GUI one? You can have access to the Git GUI. We're going to be using the command line most of the time in this class, and kind of like encouraging that. That's why this is unchecked here. Oh. But you can have it checked if you want access to the GUI too. If you are going to end up using a GUI tool, the GitHub for Windows sort of GUI tool is way better, and a lot of the built-in tooling inside of like Visual Studio, for example, is better than the native Git GUI. But we'll be using command line for most of this, certainly for everything we're doing today. Okay, so select Start Menu folder. This just let it go in the Git. Take the default there and hit Next. That's where it's going to live in your Start menu. Using Vim for the Git default editor. We may change this later, but go ahead and hit Next here and just take the default. This really only comes into effect when you're kind of making changes inside of Git. The next one, this one's really important, so make sure you have this checked. And if you have already installed this and this wasn't checked, it may be something that we have to change later. So let me know during the exercises. We can change that. Make sure to check Use Git from Git Bash only. What this will do, this is like Ali was mentioning before, when he was doing the command line things, he opened up Git Bash and was doing like Linux commands on Windows. So it creates a little Linux terminal environment inside of Windows, and this essentially means I want to use Git from inside that Git Bash. It's the best place to do it because you can use Linux commands. Let me know in questions if I'm going too fast or anything for the Winston-Salem folks. So next screen, use the OpenSSL library. That should be the default. Hit Next. If you're on Windows, this should be the default. Check out Windows style. Commit Unix style line endings. Next. Use min TTY. That's fine. That should be the default. Next. And then these two things should be the default as well. Enable file system caching and enable Git credential manager. So when you hit install here, it's going to kind of go through a little bit of installation, and then you'll eventually see this screen, and you can kind of finish out. And I'll just wait there for just a second, make sure everybody's got that going and installed. All right. So if you're on a Mac, and you want to install this on the Mac side of things, not inside your virtual machine, let me pop out here real quick and I'll show you how to do that. So in a browser, you're going to go to this link, https://brew.sh, and I'll go here and show you what it looks like. So this is Homebrew. This is it's kind of like a package manager for Mac, for OS X, and it's going to allow us to do some nice things kind of down the road. We'll be able to do, for all the Mac users, we'll be able to do one-line installs further on down the line in the class. But for right now, if you grab this little text thing right here and copy it, Command C. And then what we're going to do is open a terminal. So you'll go in here to your Finder, file system, and we're going to go to Applications, and under Applications, scroll all the way to the bottom. There's a folder called Utilities, and then in there you'll find Terminal. And keep this handy. You may want to just keep this open because when we're doing Git stuff on the Mac, we're going to be doing that inside of Terminal. So it'll look like this, cleared out. And you're going to want to paste what you just copied from that website in here and hit Enter. And I'm not going to do it because I've already got Homebrew installed, but that will run through and install Homebrew for you. And then once you've got that installed, all you have to do once Homebrew is done installing is type brew install git. So in your terminal, through install Git, and that's it, and hit enter, and it'll install Git for you. So nice and easy, just pasting two things in the terminal. All the Mac users good? All good? All right. All right, so now that we've got everything installed, let's go configure it. There are only a couple steps to configuring Git. There are two things that we're going to do. We're essentially going to generate a new SSH key. It's a public-private key thing. Essentially, think of it as you know when you go to the hardware store and you get those like lock and key combos, right? You get like the thing that you put in your door, it's like the key thing, and then you get the doorknob with the lock, and then you got a key that goes along with it. We're going to be generating that. So there's a public key and a private key, and essentially we're going to send GitHub the lock, and then we're going to have the key. And that way, every time you're using Git from the command line and communicating with GitHub, it knows that it's you, because it's got essentially you've sent it the lock that you want to use. So the way that we're going to do that, I'm going to paste this link into Slack in questions. Oh, somebody already did it. Awesome. That's one thing on a Mac. Slack is really slow. So somebody's already pasted that link in there. If you click on that, you click on that, you're going to go to this page. And depending on if you're on a Mac or on Windows, you're going to have two sets of instructions. So on Windows, you're going to open git bash. The way that you do that is go down here to your programs, to all programs, and scroll down until you see the Git folder, and pop that open, and you'll see git bash right here. On a Mac, we're going to use the terminal, so just leave your terminal open, and we'll use that. So in Windows, I'm going to pop this open. This is git bash. This is what Ali was in earlier today. Yeah. Oh, hold on. Hello? Yeah, I'll leave that up. All right, let me do this. I'm gonna Is that bit.ly link working for anybody? Nobody? All right. Let me open up from the what? It worked okay. All right. Yeah, let me paste it. Let me paste it in here. Slack just takes so long to run on that. All right, there you go. All right, so everybody go ahead and click on that link in Slack, the full one, and that should take you to this screen. I'm going to get this open on Windows so I can kind of keep that in the background. All right, so the first thing you're going to do here, once you've got your Git bash shell open, does everybody kind of have that? Everybody have the Git bash open on that? Okay. So you're going to want to type this example here. You can just copy it from the screen. The only thing obviously you're going to change is put your email address in here. Use the email address if you remember it, the one that you signed up with GitHub with, is the email address here. So it's just SSH keygen -keygen space -t RSA. Just copy this whole thing in there and use your email. When you do that, it'll say it's generating an RSA key pair. When it says where do you want to save that key, just keep the default here. It should be under C users and then kind of your username .ssh idrsa. Just keep the default there. That's where you want it to put it. So hit enter there, and then for step number 4, when it asks for a secure passphrase, don't put anything in there. Just leave it blank. So you'll just hit enter there, and then when it says enter same passphrase again, just hit enter. Just leave it blank there. Stand up for a second. All right, is that working for everybody? Good. Which one? Oh yeah, the passphrase. Just hit enter. Just leave it blank. Yeah. Yep. Otherwise, we can change that if you didn't do that. We'll change that during the exercise. But otherwise, whenever you use GitHub, it's going to like prompt you for a password every time. And because we're using that private key, public key thing, the private key is something that only you have on your machine. So that's secure enough when you're communicating with GitHub. As long as your machine is secure. So if you're using full machine encryption like we talked about earlier, nobody's going to be able to get to that key anyway. So you don't really need to protect it with a passphrase. Okay. And it's just more of a nuisance than anything else. Okay. And so then once you're done with that top part, just do this, follow these steps down here at the bottom. And essentially, once everybody's done with that, just let me know. Let me know, Winston-Salem, when y'all are generally good too. And we'll take those keys, and I'll show you the next step, which is taking the public part of that key, and we're going to upload it to GitHub and show you how to kind of connect into GitHub to make it really easy to push and pull code from it. So I'll give everybody a second to kind of get caught up there. All right, so we're gonna pause just for a second because they're working on it there too. Anybody have any issues? All right.
This?
Yeah. It's like two separate environments.
Yeah.
And it's like two separate keys. And so for yours, when you do the part where you put the key up on GitHub, they'll do that twice. One from each place. Yeah. That's going to be sandbox that you asked about earlier. Okay, so you're going to generally get just stuck in it. You're writing the password part? Okay. You should be good. Yep, you should be good.
We don't have friends.
Yep. So just do that eval, right there. And then that'll show up. And then just do this right there. And then you should be good to go. And we'll do the next step is kind of more of a manual thing. It's like a copy and paste out into GitHub. And that's not on that instruction. But yeah, you're good. Anyone else?
type in the exact line, you know.
So this is creating a key. It's creating a public and private part of the key. So you'll see two files in there. I'll show you in a minute. You'll see two files in there. One of which is your private thing, which you're going to see, and the public one, we're going to take a copy of that and put it up on GitHub. And it's two parts of like a lot, essentially. So you're going to have a private key, it's going to have a public key. And it's going to allow you, when you're communicating with GitHub, when you're pulling code down or pushing it up, that's your GitHub, that cloud service. Those keys are what keeps everything secure. So what you did was just generate that. That's why it kind of took a while. It takes a while to kind of cryptographically generate those keys. It's doing kind of like hard work, but that's why it took part of the generator. So you're good though. And then just, So yeah, if everybody finished the top part of that, then there are the instructions kind of continue right there. Just do those two little pieces, and then we'll move on to the next step.
Okay. So we're almost at step 1. So since you guys have your steps already, you're going to go in there and you're going to
it's generating public and private. Essentially, so you're going to have two files.
this was the next step.
So that's good. That's good. You're going to generate the dollar and open up a random. Okay. So it's going to generate. So remember, you do LS. You do the space. You have to do LS and the
Step 2 to add could add an existing key that is a different name. You're going to type in SSH-add.
That's your private one. So think of it like a lock. We're going to give it a lock, and then we have the key with it. The key is that ID. The key is that ID. Your private key. You don't ever want to share that with anyone. That's like the private domain key. The public one we're going to put up on GitHub. And that allows you to communicate. So you're creating kind of a.
Well, just copy and paste this stuff.
Yeah. And then
I did it wrong.
next step. And then we'll push it up there. Y'all did that. You hit just here for the passphrase. Yeah.
Space.
Not yet. We'll do that. I'm sure I'll do that. Yep.
Yeah, we can. Cool. On this side.
Yep. So you use that do LS.
That's a good one.
In space. Here. Just until so
it's like it's waiting.
that's LS is like the listed directory. Tilde is like my home directory, and then /SK. That's like a special folder. That's where you just generate those two parts. That one's the public key. That's the public part. It's like two parts of a lot. The public part is the one we're going to send up to GitHub. And I mean, you'll keep a copy of it there. You'll copy it, paste it into your account. GitHub, everybody's individual account. And then when you say, git push or git pull, when you're pushing and pulling stuff in GitHub, that's how GitHub knows that. It created like it knows because it's got the lock key created. Only you can open it.
So I created. I reinstalled it.
Yeah, don't do it. Don't do it after. And then you go over to the and then right click like up on this side. See? It's how we call it matters.
It's painfully obvious, but when you find it, you find it.
There should be a way to like, you know how there's like a left and a right. So we're doing this on the side. There you go. You guys can see it.
So imagine like if all of you guys were on a team right now, and imagine all of us are building one piece of software together. So everybody can edit the same thing now, and everybody has their own little individual version of what's going on. But at the beginning of the exercise, as well as their individual versions, there is a community version. One
That's something might be going on here.
Somebody breaks it,
adding characters in here.
step
Something's
back
off
in time and say, all right, this was 1 minute before it was broken, right? So we can go back before it's broken. And then you can all be like, all right, Matt, why did you break it? That was wonderful for that.
So, Allie, is everybody ready there? The next steps? Okay, cool. All right, so we're gonna go on to the next step here. Now that everybody's got that all your keys built, so I'll show that on here. I'll show what we just did. So let's see if I can make this a little bigger. Usually you can, there we go, okay. So because this is a Git bash window, it kind of acts like Linux. So we can type in ls here. We're gonna look at kind of what we just did. So type in ls and then shift tilde kind of up in the upper left hand corner. Get that /.ssh. And basically what this is doing, it's showing the tilde is a shortcut in Linux. It basically means your home folder. So think this is kind of the equivalent of on Windows, like your C users, like my C users Harper folder for my laptop. Whatever your main user folder is, kind of the root of that. So tilde in Linux is sort of a shortcut to get there. So we're basically saying look in the root folder here in the SSH, which is a special folder, and here are the files in here. And I'll show you, if we pop open an Explorer window, that's another little trick from the from any command window. You can type in Explorer and then dot. Dot is like the shortcut for this folder. So you can say Explorer space dot, and pulls open Windows Explorer for you. So you see right here this .ssh folder. If we drill into that, these are the things that we just made. You can kind of ignore this known host. You'll get this later, but you should have two files right in here, ID_RSA and ID_RSA pub. So these are, when I was talking about that lock and that key that we were making, that two-part sort of public-private key, this is what we just generated. So the ID_RSA file is your private key. The ID_RSA.pub file is your public key. And that's what we're going to use to put up in GitHub so that it recognizes that's kind of the lock part of it, right? And the ID_RSA is what you're going to use every time as the key when you're pushing things or pulling things from GitHub. So if you right-click on ID_RSA pub and hit edit, or it thinks it's a publisher file. Let's close out of that. That's the only problem with file extensions when you got too many things installed. So let's open that with your editor. Open it with Notepad or Notepad++, and we'll take a look inside. It's going to look something similar to this. Everybody's going to look a little bit different, but you'll have SSH, RSA, and then just this long line of stuff. So this is your public key, and then you'll have like your email address at the end. So this is your public key. So if you've got this open in your editor, what you're going to want to do is select everything. So Command A to get all, Command C to copy. You can do the same thing up here, select all, from the edit menu, but it's faster just to, AC, Command AC. So copy that, and we've got that in our clipboard now. We're going to open up GitHub. So github.com. Now that we've got the contents of that public file copied, use my little 1Password thing. This is what I was showing you before about, oops, got to put the right one in. So I don't even know my GitHub password, right? But 1Password does. So I click that, automatically logs me in, and then authentication code. This is the two-factor authentication I was talking about earlier. And this is my one-time password that expires. And I'll jump right in. Okay. So once you're in GitHub, what you're going to want to do is click on your profile in the upper right-hand corner. You'll see like a little picture of yourself, profile, and it'll drop down. Actually, let me drag this down so everybody in Winston-Salem can see it. So you'll click on your profile here. You want to go to your profile. So click on that. Sorry, you want to go to settings. Sorry, under your profile picture, you want to go to settings. Then you want to click over on the left-hand side over here on SSH GPG keys. You can see I've already got a couple in here. And you're going to want to click on New SSH Key. You can call this whatever you want. You can put whatever title in, laptop or however you want to remember that it's like this machine that is the key for. So you put in laptop or whatever, and then you're going to want to do Command V to paste your key in there. Right? So it should look kind of something similar to that. Everybody have that? So where I got the key again, good question. The question was where I got that key. So in Git Bash, we're back in Git Bash over here. If you do ls //.ssh, that's going to take you to your SSH folder, and then you do Explorer space and dot. That's going to open up your File Explorer right in this area, and you'll see your SSH folder here. Now remember, we talked about hidden folders. Ali talked about hidden folders earlier today. This is kind of where that comes into play, because SSH is a hidden folder. So if you didn't turn on hidden folders before, like show hidden folders, you might not see this. If that's the case, then just go to your view settings and folder options and view, and make sure you show hidden folders, and it'll show up. So you're going to want to go into that .ssh folder, and you'll see that ID RSA pub file. Right-click on that, open it in Notepad, and then this is where you're going to want to copy it out. So do a select all on that, copy it, and then have that in your clipboard. Come over into GitHub and paste it right in that key. Everybody wants to sound good on that? So, and then just obviously click add SSH key, and that'll put that in there, and it'll add it in. You'll see something similar to this. You'll see a kind of a record in there that you've got that. All right. So that's, at this point, your local machine is kind of bound to GitHub. It's kind of created that. It's created that kind of key exchange. You've done that key exchange, and so everything that we do from now on, from your Git Bash, when we're talking to GitHub, we're pulling things down, we're cloning repositories, and pushing code up there and pulling things down. It's going to know how to talk to it once you've done that stuff. Okay, so a couple other little configuration steps. That was kind of the main configuration piece. The rest of them are much easier, I promise. And this is a one-time thing. Once you put your key up there, you're good. So we've done the key generation and putting our keys up there into GitHub. So now, if you're still in Git Bash, we're going to configure your name and your email. So basically, these things, I'll copy these and put these into Slack as well. But you're doing do a git config -- global username, and then obviously replace, put your first name, last name, and then git config global user email, and then email address. And I'm going to hold right here. I'm going to put these things, I'll leave this up, but I'm going to post these in Slack real quick. And once I post those in Slack, does anybody having trouble getting their key up to GitHub? Everybody good? Okay. GitHub is just kind of like a website, so you can kind of go in. We'll take a look at what it looks like and how to navigate through it and everything. Git can communicate over SSH. It's just another protocol, another port. It's a secure way of connecting to a server. Okay, so the question was, do you have to have Git open to use GitHub, or vice versa, I guess. GitHub is just the website. There are lots of other providers. GitHub is just one Git source control provider. There's like 10 others at least that provide kind of that online storage service, or the place where you can talk Git with your team. What we just did was kind of an initial setup thing. Day to day, you're just going to have your Git command line open, and you're going to be doing commands and pushing and pulling code and stuff like that. And you may go like a week without opening like the GitHub webpage. You know what I mean? That's really just for if you want to go in and peruse through source code or kind of read stuff like without it being in an editor. You can do some. We'll look at some things later like git blame, kind of look at like who did changes. So GitHub does some nice things where it sort of shows you the history in interesting ways and kind of shows who did what. If you're trying to like figure out where something went wrong and go ask somebody a question, who entered this code? Let me go ask them a question about that. But honestly, you really won't go into like GitHub the site that much. In that command line, in that Git bash, yeah, everything that we. Yep. There's like a one-time thing that like for the rest of the class it'll just work. Yeah, it's like Dropbox. Okay, so Winston-Salem, I just put in this class, I just put the two Git config lines into Slack. So you can copy and paste these out of there. Obviously, change your name and your email address, but those are just single line things that helps Git know who you are and what your email address is. And that way, as you start to check in code and commit changes to source code and push it up to GitHub, it knows like what name and what email to put beside it and everything. What's that? I don't think so. I think you'd be okay there. But yeah, since an email, the only reason why your first name and last name are in quotes is because there's a space in there, so you kind of have to delimit it. it's sort of like what, and that's where when Ali was saying earlier, like developers like to use. Sorry, the question was if I put my email address in there without with quotes, will it mess up? And the reason why the first name and last name in the git config are in quotes is to kind of delimit it, because there's a space in there. It needs to know that this kind of goes together. It's like what Ali was talking about, where developers hate having spaces in folder names because it confuses the system. So that's saying, this is a name, it all goes together. And then because the email doesn't have any spaces in it, you can just do that separately, yeah, without quotes.
Yep. So if we close out here, and we open it back up, we'll automatically know that we're signing up.
Are you talking about the git bash? Oh, so the question was, if I close out of git bash and open it back up, will it know kind of what I'm trying to do, where I am? So it depends. The answer is it depends on where you are. So if you I'll show you in a second like how to open git bash kind of at a location. When we install git bash, remember during the installation there's that little checkbox that says add git bash here. What that does is in the operating system in Windows Explorer, it allows you to like right click on a folder and say open git bash like right here in this folder. And so what you'll normally do is like how you have your projects folder and then in Power, you may have under that like 10 different repos, like 10 different projects you're working on. Whenever you want to go work on something, you can right click, say git bash here, and that'll open a command prompt in the context of that folder. So it'll already know you're there. And then when you do git commands like git push and git pull, and you're sort of pushing and pulling git code from GitHub, it knows you're doing it in the context of that repository. And we'll kind of get into the details of like what a repository is and all and that kind of thing. But that's why we pick that option in the install, is to give you kind of a quick way of from Windows of like saying I want to start Git in this folder essentially. Yeah. All right. So does everybody run these two commands? Everything good? All right. Ali, give me the go if everybody's mostly ready there. Any questions?
Is it supposed to prompt anything back to you after like the enter?
No. Yep. Yeah. Usually you get a response from something, but in this case, the question was when you enter in git config and these lines, will it say anything back? And in this case, it won't. It just registers it. If you do a git config, I think it's -- list. You'll see what's in there. Yeah. If anybody wants to double check and make sure that there's, I think that's what it is. Hold on. I haven't done that in a long time. Let's see, git config -- list, I think. Yeah, git config -- list will show you, it'll show you a bunch of stuff, but you should see your username and your user email in there. If you want to double check, make sure it kind of took. Yeah, there is. There's in fact, yeah, git help and then a command name will show you all about it. Yeah, we'll make sure we cover that when we're going through the commands. All right, does everybody got that all done? All right, cool. All right. Yeah. All right. So is everybody in Winston-Salem ready? You want another minute or so? Somebody just punch in questions. Give me the go ahead. All right, so I'm going to hop back over here. So we generated our keys. We pushed our keys up to GitHub. Did our git config to put in our username, email. That's all done, and that's pretty much it. So we've got everything installed, and we've got everything configured. So now let's take a look and see what this can do. See what Git does for us here. So I'm going to switch back over to Windows here. Actually, I'm going to switch over to Max as a bigger screen. Okay. Where am I? Actually. Okay. So I'm going to go into my projects folder. So from a Git Bash, I'm doing this in Mac, but it'll work exactly the same in Git Bash on Windows. So if you want to on Windows, if you're out of it, if you jumped out of Git Bash, you can always get back in. Actually, I'll show you the better way to get in than go into start programs. So if you come in here to your computer, go to your C drive and projects, and ooh, I don't have an Empower folder. All right, so I'm going to make one. Power. Okay. So if you find your Empower folder, you're going to right-click on it, and you'll notice. Does everybody have this Git Bash here option when you right-click on a folder? So you just right-click on it, and you should have a Git Bash here option available now. If you don't, you may need to do a reboot for it to kind of show up, but it should show up there. So when you click on that, you'll see that right away I'm in the right place. So C Projects Empower. So you'll see it already kind of takes you right to where you want to be. So the first thing that we're going to do, first thing that we're going to kind of learn about is cloning a repository. So cloning a repository is if there's something that's already out on GitHub or some other Git sharing site that you want to get a copy of. That's the first thing you do is go out and clone it and get your own copy before you start working on it. So the way to do that is if you pop open GitHub, we're going to clone the actual the course content repository, so everybody can have like a personal copy on their machine. So what we're going to do is go out here, go to Empower Course, and once you've selected Empower Course here, you'll see a link called Empower Course Course Content in GitHub. Everybody click on that. And you'll see here that, just browsing through it, kind of got, all the days, you've got code of conduct, installations. This is all the HTML files. This is all the content that actually powers the internet site. So what you're going to want to do, there's a button over here on the right-hand side, big green button that says clone or download. Click that. It'll pop open a little window right here. Oh, okay. So a little bit behind in Winston-Salem. We'll pause right here real quick. But if everybody wants to do this one step, click on clone or download, clone with SSH. And copy this right here. And we're going to come over to our window, and if on Windows you're going to right click and do paste. So if you're in your window here, right click, paste like that. Okay, hold on. We're gonna wait for just a second for Winston-Salem. And I'll do this again, but at the beginning of this, just do git clone git clone, and then kind of paste that in there. We'll go over this again in just a second. And make sure you're in your Empower folder when you do that. So we got a question from Winston-Salem. How can we connect to the Empower course on GitHub? So if you're on the GitHub site, if you've logged in, if you've sent me your username, I will have added you here. If you haven't, or you haven't accepted your email, you may not see that yet. When you click on this little cat here in the corner, if all you see is your name right here, that means that you haven't been added to the Empower course yet. And if that's the case, then we can fix that up right now. If you come up here to the corner in your profile, in the upper right-hand corner of your picture, and you click on, so it's this right here, click on your profile. It should say signed in as. If you copy this, this is your GitHub username. For anybody in Winston-Salem who has not sent me their Git user account, if you could just copy this out right here, your Git username, and post that into the questions in Slack, I'll get you signed up for it. And once you've signed up and you accept in your email the invitation, then you'll see the Empower course here in your in GitHub. You may have to kind of refresh after that, but go ahead for anybody who has not sent me their Git username. It's in the upper right-hand corner here under the profile, and just select that out and copy it in. Copy it into Slack in the questions folder, and I'll get that. Okay, so there's one right now, and I'll get these added. Okay, and when I send out these invites, you're going to get an email, in whichever email address you signed up with, and go ahead in there and just hit accept. And then when you do that, come back into your GitHub page. You may have to refresh it, and then if you click on this little cat here, you should have Empower course in this drop down. That's what will show up. All right, so I'm going to add. Everybody keep on sending them from Winston-Salem. I'll add them. Huh? Yeah, so if you're, yep. So if you're, if you copied, if you were running, if you're in Richmond and you're running a little bit ahead here, if you came into course content and copied this clone or download thing here, then you're going to want to do, git clone space and then paste that in. So git clone, make sure you're in your Empower folder when you do that. Git space clone space and then paste that in. You may have to right click it and do paste if you're in the git bash, and that'll pull down, and I've already got it there, but it should pull down a bunch of stuff. And then if you do an ls, you'll see all the files that you just pulled down from GitHub. So let me add these. Okay. All right, so Winston-Salem, I'm going to add all of y'all. Get you set up here. Okay, Emma Salinas. Emma, you've already been invited, but I'm going to re-invite you. Make sure if you look in your spam filter, yeah, it looks like you've already got access there. should be okay. You may have to refresh to see your see the Empower course show up. Yeah, for anybody who's already been invited, who's already in here, just make sure you check your spam folder. You'll get an email from GitHub, and you'll have to click accept the invitation to the Empower course to get access to it. Okay. For anybody who's downloaded the repository, remember you can do explore space dot, and that'll open up the Explorer window, and you'll actually see all the files you just downloaded in there. And the cool thing is you can like double click on the index file, and you'll see like a local copy pop up in Chrome of the website. So that's actually, you know, it's the same thing. You basically just pulled down the stack website off of GitHub that you've been looking at. Yeah, it'll be because it's local. You're loading it off your hard drive. There's no call. You remember, no DNS call, no HTTP call. It's like when you're running stuff locally, it's like crazy fast. Yeah. That can cause problems too, because when people are developing things, it's like, well, it's working really fast on my machine. Then you put it on a web server, and it's like, why is it so slow? You know. for cloning it, for cloning on the repository. Yeah, yeah. Oh no, sorry. Yeah, you get clone. And then do right click. Say yes. Yeah, you can get some yes there. So the first time, yeah, you hit enter. There you go. It'll pull it all down. Now you can do Explorer and then space and then dot, and it should pull it up. Yeah. So another thing, yeah, for anybody who did the git clone, it may challenge you the first time that you do it. It'll say, hey, there's a fingerprint. You know, do you trust this computer? Just type yes and hit enter. That's a one-time thing. That's we talked about those keys before, those SSH keys. That's and we'll go over this with the Winston class in a second, but. That's the very first time you SSH into a server, it'll say, you know, do you trust this server? And once you do, it remembers it. That's that. If you remember that known host file that I had in my folder, that's where that comes from. It keeps like a running list of servers that you SSH into, and basically it's a way of if somebody was trying to spoof you, if there was kind of a hacker in the middle and was saying, hey, I'm this server, talk to me. You would say, nah, I've seen your fingerprint before. It kind of stores a little fingerprint in there. Like, I've seen you before. I know that's not you, and it kind of gives you a warning. So if you ever see that, not the first time, if you ever see that again, be careful, because it may be somebody trying to act like GitHub. Okay. All right. So is everybody in Winston-Salem getting there? We've gotten lots of GitHub usernames, gotten them all typed in. So make sure you accept your invitation. Looks like there's still 8 pending invitations. So if there's anybody on this list, make sure that you're checking your email. Go ahead and send. I'll go ahead and send everybody on the pending invitation list to send those out again. Make sure you check your email, whatever you signed up for GitHub with, and accept the invitation, and you should get in. And once we start the exercise, for anybody who's still not on, I'll be around, and Allie can help you there on that side, kind of get set up. So we won't leave you stranded. But yeah, Allie, give me a signal in questions when y'all are ready to go. Hey. You there? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty much where we stopped. Was just cloning it. So I'll start there and redo that step, and then we'll just go from there. And anybody who's still not set up on GitHub, like once we start the exercise, just let me know, and we'll get them set up and going. I'm just going to run through the same exercise that everybody's going to be doing. Just walk through it one time so everybody can kind of see it, so everybody can sort of pay attention to that on that side, and then we'll kind of break and do the exercise, and then we'll just be walking around kind of helping. Does that work? Okay. All right, cool. Thanks. All right. All right. So for anybody who's not quite set up yet on GitHub, don't worry. I'm going to walk through kind of an exercise, a couple different things. I'm going to show you a couple different things, and we're going to walk through an exercise, and then we'll kind of break and sort of everybody will work on that. And for whoever's not set up, we'll have an opportunity there to get you straight and get you started on the exercise as well. So we'll get kind of caught up at that point. So now that we've got Git installed, Our keys are up on GitHub. We're going to clone a repository. So this is we're going to be cloning the course content repository. So it's a repository that already exists out. It's the main this site essentially. So we're going to come here to Empower course content. Click on that link. Then there's a green button here on the side that says clone or download. Right, click on that. Clone with SSH is what we're going to choose. So if you copy what's in here, you can either click on this little clipboard to copy that, or you can select it and do Control-C and copy that out. And then we're going to come over here to our terminal, and we're going to do git clone and then paste that in. So that's what it looks like on a Mac. On Windows, you're going to do git clone, and I'll show you over here. So it's git, whoops, and this is going to be in C projects Empower. So if we go again, how to get here is you go out to your computer, click on C, find your projects directory, double click on that, and you've got your Empower directory, double click on that. Actually, so if we come back out, if we're looking at our Empower directory, because we installed Git, we're going to right click and choose Git Bash here. That'll open your Git Bash. Instead of going to your to your programs directory here and opening Git Bash kind of at your root, you're actually going to give it the context. So you can see up here it's already in C projects Empower. So you're kind of opening your Git Bash right in the location that you want it. So once you're in here, you can see that there's nothing in there doing ls. There's nothing in that folder. So we're going to do git clone space and then right click, and we're going to paste. Whoops. Let me grab this again. So git clone, and then we're going to paste in this long string that you copied from GitHub. So git at GitHub, Empower course content. So you copy that right out of the web page by clicking that green button there and copying that out. When you hit enter there, it should say cloning into course content. You may get something that pops up that says, warning, are you sure you want to talk to this server? It'll say yes or no. Just type in yes and hit enter there. That's a one-time thing. That's so that it ensures that you're talking to the right SSH server, that you're talking to Git. It'll kind of remember it from here on out, and it won't bother you with that anymore. So that's a one-time thing. Just hit yes. It'll put it in your known hosts file, and it'll remember that one's okay. So I'll wait for everybody to kind of get that cloned down. When you do, you can type in ls, and you'll see that you have a new folder there where you didn't before. So git clone basically does an operation where it goes out and it grabs an entire repository. So what we're looking at here is the repository root. So you see the course content folder. I'll move over here on a Mac, kind of see it a little bit bigger. So this will say, you've already got it. If I try to clone it in somewhere, okay, so it pulls that down. So I do ls, and I've got course content, okay. I've got this other repository, you can just ignore this, but you're going to have course content. And then we're going to, remember from earlier, we're going to change directory into that. So do cd course, and you can just hit tab, it'll auto-complete it, cd course content. So now we're inside that folder. So now if you do ls, boom, you got all your day folders, all your index HTML and resources and code of conduct. This is essentially all of the content that you see from this site. We just cloned it and pulled it down. So we're kind of grabbing a local copy of that repository. Okay. The other nice thing, once you're in here, you can do Explorer space, and then dot. Remember, dot is the shortcut for this folder. It's kind of like, you know, right here. So Explore is just say open Windows Explorer here is kind of what you're saying. See, whoop, I'm on a Mac, so that's not going to work. But I come back over here on Windows. I'm going to cd into course content and explore, and that'll pop it open. And so then you'll see the Windows Explorer view of this. And the cool thing is you can double click on one of these index file, or any of these files really, but index file, double click on that, boom, and it opens it in Chrome. Now you'll notice that up here, instead of it being, you know, the URL, instead of it being Empower Course, GitHub IO, blah blah, you know, this thing, it's running from your local file system. So when you look in the URL file up here, this is kind of a specialized case. Instead of like an internet URL, a domain name, you're going to see where it is on your local file system. So it says file and then C projects, and you know, this is where it is on your local system. But the cool thing is it's got JavaScript, it's got CSS, so you can actually like click into it, click through it. I mean, you know, this is running off your local machine that you've pulled down. So this is kind of how you start with collaborative development, right? You go out, kind of grab a project, bring it down, and then you can go in and start changing HTML, and then you can kind of push it back, push your changes back and everything. And that's essentially how we've been building out this site. You know, instructors will come down and put their content in and push it up. And with GitHub Pages, I'll show you how to turn on GitHub Pages in a little bit. That's kind of how you automatically publish it out on GitHub. So it's kind of a nice, like a one-stop shop for taking static web content and just automatically making it available on the internet, which is usually kind of a process if you're not using GitHub Pages. So back here to our repository, we're going to do a couple things in Git. We got a question from Winston-Salem. Can you run any website as a local file as long as it's downloaded on your computer? That depends. As long as it's static content, so as long as it's an HTML file and static content, then you can. You can actually pull down, you know, in your browser, you can actually save websites. You can save, you know, HTML files and CSS. Kind of, there's certain things like spiders that kind of go out and can grab web content and sort of pull things down live off of a website. But usually those are going to be missing certain things, and there's so many dynamic pieces of websites now, like, you know, code that generates the actual content. You're not going to be able to get, you know, the code that's running the website. So you'll kind of get the final product from the website. But yeah, you can run that locally, just like we're doing in this example. All right, so let's go over kind of some Git basics. If everybody's got their Git terminal open, the first thing we're going to do is Git status. So this is going to kind of show you at any given point in time. If you're and make sure you're in the course content folder before you do this. So if you're not in the course content folder, kind of cd into the course content folder. Make sure you're in here. Git status is going to show you, and it looks a little bit different on Windows, but essentially Git status shows you what the current state of your Git repository is. So right now it's saying your branch is up to date with origin master. We'll talk about origins in a minute. We'll talk about the remote parts. Nothing to commit, working tree clean. That means you have kind of like a clean directory, everything's good. As you would start to make changes in here, that's when you would do that. So in this particular repository, only the instructors have write access, so you won't be able to follow along with this part. But I'm actually going to make a couple of changes just to show you kind of how Git works and publish some new content out there to the live website. So in order to do that, take a look at my files here. I'm going to use a file editor called Atom. We'll kind of take a look at this at some point in the class. You can use, you know, any editor you want with this, but this is part where don't follow along with this because this site can't be edited. In a minute, we're going to do an exercise where everybody's going to update some folders inside of a repository where you can make changes. So I'm going to open up the index file here. Again, you've kind of seen this before. This is sort of the the HTML that was sort of behind the scenes. I'm going to go ahead and open this up locally, so you can kind of see what it looks like as we're making changes. So I'm going to pop this open in Chrome. All right, so here's what it looks like. I'm going to put our Sightsource logo over here on the side. Okay, so I'm going to come in here to my editor, and I've already got the image in here. You can kind of see that it's commented out. This is what let me bump this up in size a little bit. I'm sure everybody can see that. This is what a web comment looks like for HTML. So as long as you wrap something in this little angle, exclamation, dash, dash, and then a dash, dash angle on the end, that's kind of, it basically says, hey, browser, even though this is in here, kind of ignore this. So I'm just going to uncomment this line right here, and I'll show you what it does. There's an image file. It's pointing to a local GIF file that I have, and now when I come over here and refresh that, our logo pops up in the corner. So I want to publish this out to the main website. So I'm going to check these changes into Git. So now when I come into Git, since I've made a change in my editor, I'm going to do Git status again. Okay. Now it says, okay, changes not staged for commit. Okay, so it'll say this has been modified. My index HTML file has been modified. If you had files that had been added, it would show them there as well. So it'll show modified files, anything that's added, basically anything that's changed since the last time you pulled it down or the last time that you committed. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do git add dot, which basically, again, remember dot is like the shortcut for this folder. So it's like, hey, git, add everything in this folder. Like I want you to get everything in this folder. So now when I do a git status, see how it turns green? Okay, this means it's been staged. So up here you'll see changes not staged for commit, which basically means it's just a dirty working directory. It means you've made changes, but you haven't told Git that you want to that it's ready to kind of commit these things. Once I say git add, that's going to tell Git, hey, I want to stage these. I haven't committed these yet. I haven't committed these changes, but I'm about to. I'm getting ready to. And so you'll see here now it's turned green and it's modified, and then here's my changes to be committed. So my next step is I'm going to say git commit. AM is like dash A is all, so it's like git commit everything. And then the M, so these are kind of command line parameters. So usually with Git commands or with any kind of command line things, you do a dash and then something, and it's like extra parameters that you want to feed to the program. So you do git commit dash AM. A means all. M means message. So every time you commit something, remember, because Git's a collaborative platform, you're going to want to let other developers and your future self know kind of what you are working on at any given time. So you want to have really, really good descriptive commit messages. That's really important, especially if you're working on a big team, or if you're going to be maintaining source code over many, many years, which you're likely to do. You'll want to have a commit message that tells you exactly what you are working on at that point in time. So really kind of think hard about your commit messages. So for this one, I'm going to say added logo, added S2 is Sightsource, added Sightsource logo. Okay, so I committed that. Now if I do git status, it's going to say, okay, your branch is ahead of origin master by 1 commit. This means origin master. So I guess we'll talk about branches a little bit. Your master branch is your default branch. It's kind of where you always are in Git, unless you tell it to go. Remember we talked about earlier about kind of branching off. Like if you have one version, you kind of branch off into another version. Master branch is where you're always going to be, unless you switch branches, and we'll show that in a minute. But for right now, we're just going to keep everything kind of on the master branch, stay within that. Origin means GitHub. because I cloned this repository from GitHub, it already knows, the repository already knows where it came from. And so if I do a git remote right here, it's, well, git remote verbose, yeah. So if I do a git remote, it's going to show me, you remember when we did a git clone and put this long string in there where it was like, here's where to clone it from? See, it remembers that. It's got git, GitHub, blah, 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 you know, that whole git URL there essentially. And it knows that's where you're fetching from, and it knows that's where you're pushing to. And origin is just like it's just like an alias, just like master branch is the main branch. Origin is like the default location. You can have more than one